Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our summer education series. I'm Teresa Spellman, the president of the HDSA Greater New York City chapter of volunteers who are here to support a local community. Over the course of the summer, we are hosting more of these events with Columbia University HDSA Center of Excellence in New York City. We encourage you to submit your questions ahead of time when you register or visit our social media at HDSA GNY. For the presentation today, we encourage you to ask questions via the anonymous chat. And at the end of the presentation, there'll be time for Dr. Shah to answer those questions, but we're gonna hold it till the end. Just so you know, the chat is anonymous, so feel free to use that as a resource to ask questions to Dr. Shah, and don't be shy. Thank you all for joining, but before we begin, I just want to mention a couple of items. One, the HDSA Center of Excellence at Columbia University would like you to know that they're open for telehealth visits by appointment most Fridays and in person for new patients sometime in July. FYI, contact information's on the last slide of the presentation, but phone number there, in case you don't have it, is 212-305-9172. The Center of Excellence is now open for clinical trial visits on site. We're actively enrolling individuals for the exciting study that Dr. Shah will be discussing today, Change HD. We hope to be able to offer enroll observational visits on site in the near future, and we'll provide an update on the status of research studies at the beginning of each session. And if you have any questions, of course, you can please contact Paula Wasserman at 212-305-4597. Now I'm going to take a pause, but I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Shah is an attending neurologist for the HDSA Center of Excellence at Columbia University. She is an assistant professor of neurology at Columbia University Irving Medical Center and is a specialist in movement disorders. She received her undergraduate degree at MIT and her medical degree at Indiana University. She completed her neurology residency at Columbia and served as chief resident in her final year. Dr. Shah spent a year at the World Health Organization in Geneva, working on the public health aspects of neurological illnesses. Dr. Shah's research interests involve how to overcome barriers of stigma and discrimination to improve healthcare access for vulnerable individuals who suffer from mental health conditions and neurodegenerative disorders. It is unusual for a movement disorder specialist to also have expertise in cognitive and behavioral issues as well. Due to this knowledge base, she really brings a holistic and intuitively clinical approach to HD patients and their families. She is actively involved in research and has, in a short period of time, served as an investigator on 7 HD research projects since joining the center in 2016. Lastly, one of her favorite forms of payment is a really good cannoli. Woman after my heart. With that, I'd like to now turn this over to Dr. Shah to present information on a new research project she is working on that provides an opportunity for at-risk youth to participate in research called Change HD. Dr. Shah?
So I think I'm unmuted.
Yes,
and
you're all
great.
set.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And hello to everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really honored and pleased to be here to share with you some of our work about this Change HD study, which, as she noted, is the only study of its kind for at-risk youth. So let me just be sure everything is, there we go. So some of you may have heard of the study before with its prior label, which was Kids HD, but we're really excited to share that Kids HD is now recognized as Change HD. And to tell you a little bit about what Kids HD was, this was a study that was based at the University of Iowa, piloted in 2006 and ultimately funded in 2008. It was directed for, it's been going on in one form or another for about 13 years, and it focuses on young people who are at risk for HD, meaning they either have a parent or grandparent who's been diagnosed. Most of the participants in the Kids HD study would complete their visit in a single day, excuse me. In addition, there was a study along with Kids HD called Kids JHD, which has been going on for about 7 years and enrolls young adults or young people who have been diagnosed with juvenile Huntington's disease. Patients are offered either 1 or 2 days to complete the study. And Kids JHD remains unfunded, but University of Iowa continues to enroll new participants and bring back returns as they're able. They rely heavily on donor funds to pay for families to travel to participate. But for today, I'm going to focus on Kids HD, which is now being referred to as Change HD. So we've been awarded 5 years of funding to continue and expand the research we've done with Kids HD. And the purpose is to continue to work with young people who are at risk for HD, but now the age range has increased to 30. And so why 30? More on that soon. So what does Change HD stand for? Child to Adult Neurodevelopment in Gene Expanded Huntington's Disease. So this study has now been funded by the NINDS and approved through 2024 in order to examine young people at risk for HD who are between the ages of 6 and 30. Some of the goals of this study are to replicate the findings of Kids HD. Since the University of Iowa was the first and remains the only study to research young people at risk for Huntington's, we don't want to assume that those findings are for granted. We need to confirm by doing the study again and using a larger sample size. In addition, it's critical to include the entire period of brain development and address the lack of data in the young adult range. So that's why there's been an expansion from age 18 to age 30. So although we've collected a large sample over many years of research and the findings are robust, given that it's the first study to look at young people who are at risk for HD, the next logical step is to replicate the current findings with a larger sample. Enrolling a bigger sample will really help us determine subtle differences that we may not have found in a smaller group. And sometimes with subtle differences, we need a bigger group to even demonstrate those better. Now we'll focus on kind of looking at the entire age range. So although most studies of normal brain development have rarely gone beyond the age of 18, those that do show maturational changes we know are occurring past the age of 30. So between the various studies, of Predict, Kids HD, and Enroll HD, there is representation of populations up to the age of 18 and between the ages of 40 and 70. And so we really see there's a lack of data in the young adult range, which is demarcated by this red triangle type of shape. So in planning, oops, sorry about that. So also another thought of why it's critical to really better fill in this lack of data is as we think about gene knockdown therapy, where we're trying to prevent the disease and not just slow progression, it will be really critical to know more about the natural history of brain development of youth, those between the ages of 6 and 18, as well as young adults, to help us think about when would be the appropriate timing and indication to start treatment. We know this because preventive gene therapies, ones that knock out HD, may affect brain development because the Huntington gene, mutant Huntington, affects brain development. So a little deeper into why this is an important point to consider. One of the findings from the Kids HD and JHD projects is that mutant Huntington has a direct effect on potential intelligence. So if the brain continues to mature through age 30, when is full potential reached? This graph shows one measure of intelligence, verbal fluency. So you can see varying arcs for several CAG repeat lengths. Here, those with repeats above disease threshold 42, which I'm not sure if you can see my pointer, but indicated in this blue area, so those above 42 have less than average intelligence, and we see those below 40, they start to have an increased IQ. So in this case, an early intervention could be better to prevent symptoms and save their intellectual development, depending on their CAG repeat length, if it's less than 44, for instance. So here's that in kind of a different way, but that perhaps these groups with the arcs of a CAG repeat length of 44 or greater would have a protective role in intellectual development, whereas these, you may actually prevent intellectual development at the lower CAG repeats. So what's new in Change HD compared to Kids HD? One is that there is a computerized neurocognitive assessment. So the NIH has developed some tools that we can use using an iPad. So we think that this should help streamline the assessment protocol and make it a little bit easier. We also have a collaborative team of imaging experts who will oversee a synchronized MRI protocol. We will still gather blood samples, but this time they will be processed centrally and shipped for analysis or banked at the Indiana University. The team is collaborating with Ralph Railman and his team in Germany to collect even more detailed motor data using their novel C-motor and Q-cog equipment. This equipment uses a force plate and a series of tasks to evaluate strength, consistency, and accuracy of movements. We're also collaborating with Dr. Ed Wild and his team in the UK on their work with neurofilament light, or NFL, which is a biomarker which has some promise for Huntington's disease to potentially detect very early brain cell damage. And finally, as before, we'll be extending our age range and we'll ask participants to return each year for a total of 5 years, the duration of the study. So another exciting aspect of the study is that it will be a multi-site study with locations in Iowa, UPenn, Columbia, University of Texas in Houston, and UC Davis in Sacramento. Each site will enroll a total of 80 participants over the first 3 years. The first 60 participants enrolled will have 3 visits. The last 20 will have 2 visits. And with 5 sites, that means that we intend to enroll 400 participants total. So these are some of the teams, the team in Philadelphia, our team here in New York, myself, Jennifer O'Shershian, and Dr. Jumbo Walker, who's our imaging expert, the Houston team, Sacramento team, as well as the primary site, which is University of Iowa. So participation, young people that are younger than the age of 18 will need to be accompanied by at least a parent or guardian. All participants will be paid for their time and effort. We think the study takes about 6 to 8 hours. All of the travel and expenses related to the study will be reimbursed. Since we're enrolling folks who may have already done genetic testing, we'll be asking them to keep their results from the study staff so we can remain blinded to their status. And of course, you know, we're actually very excited that at Columbia we've been approved to resume our activities in person for this study, so we're ready to begin enrollment. We are, of course, taking all necessary precautions to ensure that both the study staff and participants, as well as their families, are safe and being protected. So this includes screening for COVID symptoms in advance of participation, screening on site, and of course, adequate PPE or personal protective equipment for both the participant, their caregiver, as well as the study team. So we're working really hard to be sure that the visits go smoothly despite some of these extra hurdles that we all have to overcome to be sure that all are safe. Just a quick note about genetic testing is that as a part of the study, we do ask for a blood sample for genetic analysis. We have to do this to get information and compare those that have the gene expansion with those that do not. The analysis is done with the blood drawn at the very first visit, and it's shipped to BioSend, the national repository that I referenced before at Indiana University. All of this information gets de-identified, meaning that anything that could link a person, like a name, their address, etc., is removed. And all of the data and samples are assigned a random number. So no results are provided to the patients, the participants, excuse me, their families, or anyone else that they might have contact with, including doctors or teachers. And we, as the study team, also do not know the testing results. And just to emphasize that this includes any assessments done during the study, any exams, any memory or thinking tests, as well as imaging results. So again, you know, we're really excited to begin the study. I think it's a really interesting and novel approach because it's the only study of its kind looking at this population and age range, and will really give us some information about the brain's development and how it's affected by Huntington's disease. So I'd welcome any questions, and I see there's a couple in the chat. So I'm going to let the HDSA team kind of take the lead and let me know how I should proceed. Thank
Great.
you everyone for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Yes, we have one question. And the question is, does participation in the study prevent participation in any other research studies?
That's a great question. So the Change HD study specifically does not have an exclusion criteria that if you're involved in another study that you shouldn't participate in the Change HD study. However, I can't say that's the case for others. So for instance, you know, an individual may be interested in another study that we're not leading, and frequently studies, as you are likely aware, don't want you to be participating in two studies at once. So from the Change HD perspective, there's no exclusion, but there may be from that other study. The other caveat or thing I might mention is that, you know, sometimes studies are doing the same testing. So for instance, there may be a memory test or otherwise that's being repeated, and we may not want the participant to be burdened by having to do multiple assessments of the same type. So I think that would be something that we could discuss, but in general, no, there's no specific prevention in your participation in other research studies, because this is an observational study. There's no drug that's being administered, etc. I hope that answers your question.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Shah while we have her? Going once.
Oh, there's someone that raised their hand.
Hold on 1 second. Yes. The person who raised their hand, if you could submit the question in the chat, that would be great. Give it one more second and see if that works. Unmute the one person who raised their hand momentarily. Hold on one second. Okay, great. Go ahead. You should be unmuted now. Okay. It looks like there are no other questions. So on that note, Dr. Shah, I just want to say a big thank you for you to join us, and we hope that you get some enrollment out of this. And if anybody has any questions, please, you can contact Dr. Shah or Jennifer Asharian on here, or Dr. Or Paula Wasserman at 212-305-4597, who works with a number of you at the Columbia COE. And if not, then just a final note, I'm going to share my screen real quick. If you could unshare yours, Dr.
Oh, sure. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Okay, great. All right. Thank you all for joining. As a final note from your fellow HDSA New York folks, we just want to say thank you again. And our next Education Day is going to be Tuesday, July 21st at 4 p.m. with Dr. Lori Quinn. And the topic is Let's Get Moving. So we hope to see you there. Oh, we have one question that just came in. Hold on one second.
All right, so we have one more question. Someone has asked, this person's nephew's son, who is 23, wants to be tested. Should he enter research or should he get a test? What would you recommend? Dr. Shah.
Yes. So thank you for that question. That's a really great question. I think that a lot of folks have questions around genetic testing. So I think my take would be that, each individual's choice of whether or not to get tested and when to get tested is very personal. I think that the individual you're referring to should probably meet with someone, a clinician or a team at an HD center, to better understand what their reasons are for getting tested, so that they can decide if that's something they even want to consider or move forward with. And then the question about research is really a separate one. So someone can get tested and still participate in research. Someone cannot be tested and still participate in research. So I think it's two different questions of one, whether this individual really wants to be tested, and how a team, an HD team, can help guide him or her through that process, as well as whether, or not they want to participate in research, because research is also not for everyone. And I think that it's a big commitment on the part of the individual. So I think that I would just encourage that individual to talk to a team or a center and explore both of those questions themselves. I hope that is helpful. And there's certainly a lot of resources and information out there that we at Columbia could share with you regarding, some literature that one could review. Because as I said, it's just a very personal choice. You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Call for questions. Anybody else? All right, great. If not, this concludes the webinar, and we hope to see you on our next webinar on July 21st. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.